You're 28, and you type 90 words a minute. That's the skill that's about to get you killed. Not the fastest in the room, not the smartest. Just the one who types fast enough that father never has to wait for a sentence to catch up with him. You've been doing this for 4 years. You're not the guy with the gun. You're the guy with the shorthand, the carbon paper, the institutional memory of everything said in rooms most members never knew existed. The Planning Commission's records keeper. You sit in the back. You transcribe. You disappear. You've gotten very good at disappearing. The thing about writing everything down is that eventually you write down something you can't unknow. You know that now. You didn't 4 months ago when father paused mid-sentence during a white night session, and the third one this year, and said, "This time, we mean it." You typed it. Hands steady, face still. That's what you trained yourself to do. The stenographer is neutral. The stenographer is a recording device with a heartbeat. That was the fracture, not the words. The fact that you kept typing. 3 days later, they handed you the list. You'd learned the rules early. Everyone in the temple had rules, spoken or unspoken, but yours were procedural, practical. They kept you safe in a way that felt like professionalism. Rule 1. Never read back what you've written. The job is to record, not to understand. Understanding is a choice. Choices have consequences. Rule 2. The transcript belongs to the community. Everything does. That was the deal from the start. And you understood it. You believed in it, actually. That's the part as people find it hard to accept. Rule 3. Confession is accountability, not exposure. The sessions where members shared their failings, their before lives, their anger, their doubt, those were for healing. That's what you told yourself. You typed them too. Rule 4. Father sees loyalty, not bodies. He'd called your name in open session twice in 4 years. Once for recognition, once for correction. Both times he said it the same way, calmly, like he already knew what came next. Rule 5. You don't leave. Not really. You'd known this for a long time, you just never let it be a thought you finished. The list they handed you had 17 dates on it. Transcripts to be destroyed before Congressman Leo Ryan's delegation arrived the next morning. You looked at the dates. You knew every one of them. They were the white night sessions. All of them. The pages they want gone are the only ones that matter. You already knew what was on them. Now they know you knew. You started the destruction process that evening. The mimeograph fluid smell was still on your fingers from the afternoon's copying work, sharp and chemical, the smell that meant you'd been making records all day. You set the first stack on the burn barrel. Then you stopped. Not heroism. Not a plan. Something more instinctive than either of those. You pulled one copy from each stack before it went in, put them in the canvas sleeve you used for session backups, told yourself it was procedural habit. You don't know why you did it. That's the part you'll think about for the rest of your life. Ryan's delegation landed the next morning. 11 journalists, 4 aides, 1 congressman. You counted them from across the pavilion while pretending to organize filing boxes. The ratio was wrong. You had seen similar numbers in a transcript from 14 months ago, a planning session about external scrutiny, about what ratios of press to political staff indicated about intent. Someone had planned for this visit before it was announced. You kept counting. You kept your face at the angle that meant friendly and occupied simultaneously. 4 years of community performance teaches you that. You know what correct smiling looks like. The cheek engagement, the eye timing, and you do it without thinking now. The thing about a learned smile is that you can't feel your own face anymore. The generator hummed beneath everything. It always did, low and constant, the baseline frequency of Jonestown after dark and before dawn. You'd stopped hearing it consciously about 6 months in. Now it was just the sound the air made, the sound of the place running. A woman from Ryan's team found you near the records building mid-morning, young, notepad in hand, relaxed posture, the kind of casual body language that takes effort to maintain. She asked about healthcare access. You answered. Correctly? She nodded, made a note, asked a follow-up about medication storage, quantities, distribution protocols. She wasn't asking about healthcare. She was asking about the pharmacy. And she already knew something about the pharmacy, something you'd noticed only through absence. The pharmacy logs had never been assigned to you. In 4 years, not once. Every other operational record came through your office. The pharmacy was an omission so consistent, it stopped being accidental. You gave her nothing. You smiled correctly. You walked away at the pace of a man with somewhere to be. That afternoon, you requested your own confession file under the guise of a records audit, standard procedure. You'd processed hundreds of them. Yours was there. Cross-referenced, indexed, filed under a tab that you'd never seen used before. Not healing, not accountability. A different category. One word: departure risk. You stood in the file room for a long moment. The mimeograph smell was in there too, embedded in the walls by now. You thought about Rule 3. Confession is accountability, not exposure. You'd believed that for 3 years. You understood now what the files were actually for. Father called you in privately that evening. The room was small. He sat behind a table. He used your name the way he used it when the answer was already known. Not a question in it, no room for surprise. He asked if the transcripts were ready, the remaining ones, the ones not on the destruction list. You said yes. He said, good. I'd hate to lose my memory. He smiled when he said it, not the community performance smile, something quieter. He meant you. He'd always meant you. You were the memory. You were the only complete record of every session, every directive, every white knight escalation. He was telling you he knew that. He was telling you he knew you knew. You said nothing. You kept your face still. You left. That night you read the copy you'd kept. All of it. It took 4 hours. The generator hummed. The camp went quiet around you. You read what you'd written over 4 years, and for the first time you read it as a sequence rather than in individual sessions. The White Nights started as drills. Then they became rehearsals. Then the language shifted. Not gradually. There was a specific session 13 months ago where the word symbolic stopped appearing in Father's statements and you typed right through it without registering the gap. Then the financial transfer authorizations, and then the security positioning memos. Then a document titled, in your own shorthand, Congressman Contingency. You thought you were recording history. You were recording a plan. A woman appeared at your door around 2 a.m. You'd known her since orientation. Same year, same intake group. She was one of the people you'd thought of as a friend, in the years when that word still meant something uncomplicated. She told you not to look at Ryan's people tomorrow. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Well, no, she said. She left before you could answer. We. Not Father, not the leadership. We. You turned the word over. You'd typed it 1,000 times. It had a different shape now. Later, going back through a planning commission roster you'd memorized years ago, you'd realize she was on the security monitoring team. You'd transcribed her assignment yourself. You just hadn't looked up from the page. The threat was never where you were looking. That's what you'd find out. That's what you were about to find out. Day 2 of the delegation. Ryan held an open meeting. Any member who wanted to leave with him could step forward. You stood near the back of the room always, and watched. 5 people step forward, then 8, then more. The number kept climbing past what anyone expected, and you could feel the room recalibrate around it. You watched the security team. Their stillness was different from calm. You'd transcribed that difference before, in planning documents about crowd management and behavioral monitoring. Calm stillness is relaxed. Their kind had a quality of held weight, of something ready to move. The room just changed shape. Everyone felt it. No one said it out loud. You watched the people stepping forward and you thought about their confession files. You knew what was in some of them. Not the content, but the categories, the cross-references. You knew which ones were tagged departure risk. You understood exactly what it would cost them to walk toward Ryan. Everything they'd said in rooms they thought were safe. Everything typed, indexed, held. Freedom isn't free. And here it has a specific price. You've known the price structure for 4 years. You just didn't know you were part of it. Someone told Ryan's aide you had documents. You never found out who. You were summoned quietly, the way things happened in Jonestown when they weren't supposed to look like summoning. The co-administrator was waiting. You typed her name hundreds of times. She ran the planning commission logistics, the security rotations, the operational memos that Father had increasingly delegated over the past year. You'd been watching Father as the center of the architecture. He was diminished, visibly, medically, slower than he'd been 2 years ago. And you'd registered this without revising your map of where the decisions came from. You should have revised your map. She was the center. She'd been the center for at least 8 months. You'd written the transfer of authority yourself in a memo you'd transcribed as routine administration. You never looked up from the page long enough to see her face. She looked at you. She asked, "Are you leaving?" The right answer came out of your mouth before you'd finished thinking it. You said no. You said it the way you'd said everything in this community for 4 years. correctly, completely, with your face at the right angle. She looked at you for a moment, and then she moved to the next person, asked the same question, then the next. You weren't special. You were in a crisis. You were a checkbox. You don't feel relief. Relief would mean the danger had passed. They assigned you a filing task that kept you away from the airstrip. Routine. Stack of administrative documents, internal correspondence, nothing urgent. You worked. The generator hummed. You noticed around the edges of the sound that the radio frequency had shifted. More traffic than usual, voices coming through at intervals that didn't match the standard operational schedule. Then the radio went active, then quiet. Then a specific kind of static you'd never heard before. Not dead air, not interference. The sound of a channel that had transmitted everything it needed to. Silence on a radio is never nothing. You wrote that once in your personal notes during a late session when the generators were the only sound. You'd thought it was an observation about surveillance. You never expected to be inside it. Someone brought you a piece of paper, told you to type it up. You took it without looking, set it on the desk, positioned your hands. Then you read the first line. You've transcribed a lot of things. You've never transcribed a goodbye. You didn't type it, you set it down, you stood up, you walked out of the building at the pace of a man going to retrieve something. You kept walking. What happened next wasn't an escape. Escapes are planned. Escapes require a moment of decision, a line you cross. This was something else. A gap that opened in the chaos, in the smoke and the noise and the sudden absence of the security team's attention from any one direction. You were furniture. Furniture doesn't escape. It just ends up somewhere else when the room burns. You walked into the jungle at a pace that matched purpose. Not running. Running is visible. Running is a person who knows where they are. Walking at the right speed in the right direction is infrastructure. His background is someone going to check on something. You knew this because you'd watched it work on you for 4 years. The way the invisible people moved. The way you'd learned to be part of the architecture of a place. The jungle at night is not quiet. It has its own frequency. Lower than the generator hum, but just as constant. Your backup tape recorder was in your canvas bag. You carried it to every session, habit, professionalism. You always had a backup running. It was still running. Had been for 3 hours. You didn't turn it off. Turning it off would mean making a decision. You were done making decisions tonight. You walked until there was a road. You followed the road until there were lights. The next part took days, and it was mostly waiting in rooms that weren't yours, and answering questions you hadn't rehearsed. There were a lot of questions. Fluorescent lights, a table, men in suits who introduced themselves by agency. They were careful with you, professional. They gave you water, and told you to take your time. You told them everything. Then you understood what everything meant, in practical terms. Everything was in your handwriting, everything you described, the white knight escalations, the security protocols, the congressman contingency document. They could verify it all in your hand. Carbon paper, mimeograph copies, session transcripts dated and initialed by you across 4 years. You're a witness. You're also evidence. They didn't say that directly. They didn't need to. You found out in one of those early debriefing sessions that you weren't the only keeper who'd made a copy. There had been others, 2 that they knew of. They said it neutrally, factually, but the implication had edges. The copies were expected. Holding one didn't mean you were brave. It meant you couldn't claim you didn't understand what you were holding. The question they returned to again and again across multiple sessions and different interviewers was the simplest one. Did you know? You gave them the honest answer, which was more complicated than yes or no. You knew what you wrote. You chose not to read it back. You kept a copy at because of something below conscious decision. You handed back Ryan's aide's written exit offer. 40 seconds, you held it. And you still don't know why you handed it back. Compliance. Belonging. Something more animal than either of those. The question isn't whether you knew. The question is when knowing becomes complicity. You're not sure those are different questions. 6 months later, you listened to the tape. You'd been avoiding it. Not consciously. Just not ready. When you finally played it back, the first 2 hours were standard session audio. Background noise, generator hum, muffled voices from adjacent rooms. Then the quality shifted. Then you heard your own breathing. You were in the room when the announcement was read. You'd thought you weren't. You'd believed, or allowed yourself to believe, that you'd already left the building. But the tape doesn't lie. The tape is precise. You were there. You heard the first line. And then in the audio, you hear yourself stand up. You hear the chair move. You hear your footsteps. and then you hear yourself walk out. Some part of you knew before the decision formed, before the words were finished. Some part of you had been building toward that exit for months without your conscious mind's permission. The tape made you a more complicated witness. That's how the attorney put it. The form you'd sign made you a material witness permanently, available for testimony indefinitely, re-interview upon request, case ongoing. You signed it with a government-issue pen at a table in a federal building. Your hand moved at its usual pace, 90 words a minute. Some reflexes survive everything. They kept asking if you believed. Interviewers, journalists, later, the therapist the government assigned. Did you believe in Father? Did you believe in the mission? Did you believe in the community? You told them the same thing every time. You just worked there. You typed what was said. You recorded decisions you didn't make, orders you didn't give, escalations you didn't authorize. But you kept the copy, and you never once asked yourself why. Not until you were sitting under fluorescent lights with a pen in your hand, signing a form that would follow you for the rest of your life. The mechanism wasn't belief. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was incremental transcription. One session at a time, you recorded the ending. You just never let yourself read back what you wrote. Some reflexes survive everything. The story is fiction, but the mechanism is real.